Welcome to Disruptive by Barclays Eagle Labs in the Know. It's difficult to know everything when you're starting or running your business, and entrepreneurs have to wear many hats. I'm Ellie Wybird, Barclays Eagle Labs Transformation Manager, and in this series I'll be talking to experts on a wide variety of topics to educate and support you with some of the challenges you may be coming up against. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Welcome to In the Know. I'm Ellie Wybird from Barclays Eagle Labs, and I am your host for today's session. Before I introduce you to our speaker today, just a quick disclaimer. We've asked Steve to join us today to discuss the internet. The topics discussed are an overview of options for you to think about to help you with your independent research and business decisions, so aren't intended as recommendations or advice. Remember as well that your business has its own individual circumstances. The statements and views expressed may not be applicable or suitable for your business. Now that's out of the way. Today for In the Know, I'm thrilled to be joined by Steve Pickavance to chat about the internet, then, now, and next. Steve has worked in the technology space for 30 years and is the founder of FutureShocks, helping startups and scale-ups accelerate. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Ellie. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into, the internet.
Yeah, well, it's been fascinating. I started off in systems engineering many, many years ago. In fact, too many to recount. And then I joined this American firm that's been phenomenal, Cisco Systems. And the easiest way to think about Cisco is the plumbers of the internet, providing connectivity that brought the world together and allowed collaboration to be seamless, allowed a lot of things to be enabled in the earlier days. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. But that's my background. Yeah.
Amazing. And so today we're going to be chatting, about the internet in general. How would you, articulate the history of the internet to the average person?
Well, it started with a crash, like all good products. And there was one message to be sent. So think about two computers talking to each other in the very beginning of it. And the message they wanted to send was log, L-O-G. So they entered L, it went. They entered O, it went. And they tried to enter G, and like all great first products, no, crashed. So like anything that starts in the early stage, in early formation, it had its own little trouble beginning there. But those early forefathers gave us the beginnings of probably the biggest ability of human communication we'd ever witnessed. The next revolution, as it were. And if you think back, that was like 1969. So that's like over 50 years old now, the internet. So pretty early days. But since then, look at what it's given us.
Yeah. It boggles the mind that actually that was 50 years ago, really. What I guess the early pioneers kind of opened up communication, as you said. What do you think they may have done differently in those early days to what we're doing now?
Well, think about telephone numbers. So you remember, like here in the UK, BT had to change our telephone numbers to add an extra digit many, many years ago because they were running out of available telephone numbers. The same happened with internet. When the basic addressing, postal codes were first envisaged, they came up with a scheme that had what they thought was more than enough addresses to cover all the needs that would go ahead of it. If you talk to Vint Cerf now, who's one of that early forefathers, he would tell you, we wish we'd made bigger telephone numbers because boy, do we need them. And that's against the backdrop of we've now got 5.1 billion users online.
Wow.
From 4 computers in its early stages. So it's just a mind-boggling change that's occurred in 50 years.
What an acceleration. And you were just talking about how, I guess, communication was the primary goal back in 69. Where do you think the people first starting to use the internet in the 70s really had any idea of where it was going to end up today? What were they aiming for from that other than pure communication?
First and foremost, it was that initial communication. In fact, one of the interesting things I heard from Vint himself, he said in the early stages, they had to get funding. And the funding was mainly coming from DARPA, so the American Department of Defense and Norwegian Department of Defense, because it originated in military communications. And they said they could prove voice would work. And as it's rooted in voice as is written communication, it was seen by the Pentagon and the defense chiefs as, oh, we really got to see this. And they were testing it out in the labs, and it basically, every time they did the voice test, it just sounded like a drunk Norwegian in the way that the voice communications were working. And just so happens, because they were doing this with the Norwegians, they also had a professor in the University of Oslo that was basically sounding like a drunk Norwegian. So it gave them a little bit of a toe up when they went in front of one of the committees to get the money, and they did this demonstration of how voice would work across this new worldwide network that they'd created for global communications. And thankfully, it came over as a drunk Norwegian, and they knew this Norwegian professor, and like, excellent, we'll give you more funding. So I think the early ways you look at this is when you start something out with a vast ambition of just connecting across the world, and it might not have worked that first time, that first message typing in of log not fully being realized, but then going into this, how do we continue to develop? Well, voice being one of the key things. It really was about enabling communication from typed to voice, and then getting the funding to then progress that into what we know now. So, in the 70s, it was more about adding more academic elements on to explore that, adding more of the government intercommunications on to give a resilience to it, because it did have a rooting, as I say, in the defense industries. But now, if you think about what that's given us, if that was then, that very basics, it really came into its own in the 90s.
Yeah.
I think when I first got involved, we were in the few millions of users around the world, mainly still in academia. The first commercialization was starting to occur. AOL had not even yet printed its first CDs. Now, for those that were around during then, when you wanted to get online, you really had a couple options. You had AOL and you had CompuServe, or you had some other bulletin board type things you could get. That went on to AOL being the biggest producer of CDs. 75% of the world's CDs were AOL CDs to get online.
Wow. That's crazy, isn't it? That's absolutely crazy.
And that was just the you're talking about 92, 93 time frame. And then as you come through into the mid-90s, you were getting into this sort of like, it's 29 million users online. I saw what would be one of the first firewalls at the time, so first security type devices to protect our kind of front house of the company I was with there just before I joined Cisco. And it was amazing. It was starting to liberalize access to information, starting to enable new types of communication, but it was always a little bit static at that point. So that's kind of, let's call that Web 1 or Web 1.0, as it were. So it was very much read-only. People decided what you could see, where you could see it.
I remember that AOL logins so clearly, and I can picture the first time I properly looked at a website, and it was the original BBC News website. Other news outlets are obviously available, but I can remember it like it was yesterday. So it's crazy to think how far we've progressed since then in a relatively short period of time, since the 90s, really.
And it has been quite a lot of progression since then. But I think that's where today's generation maybe missed out on the pain that we had of loading things over a dial-up modem.
That noise.
Even in the early days of modems, it was kind of like files weren't really as big as they are now. But oh my God, can you remember some of those times you wanted to get something downloaded? And it's like it come up and the little dial icon or the download icon would say 4 days. 12 hours, 59 minutes. And we take that for granted now, right? I mean, that same thing now would be down in a second.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's taking me back. So I guess where we are now from the 90s, we've progressed again a lot further, as you've just said. We're hyper connected, we're super digital, we use the internet for literally everything. How do businesses harness that currently? How do you improve experience?
It's really modern utility for us now, right? Especially the last couple of years. Put the pandemic to one side, you've really had this whole digitization or transformation of digital use massively accelerate. I mean, I can remember even just a couple of years ago, folks said, "Oh, we want to improve our work from home, but we're not really sure." So this is pre-pandemic, right? I mean, so people are like, we're kind of still on the fence about how many people we want to allow work from home. Well, guess what? COVID changed all that, right? It just accelerated probably about 5 to 10 years worth of digital change.
Yeah.
Because people had to change the way they work. And I think that's really part of the acceleration that's going on right now around us. And it really comes around sort of 5 themes. You've got an increase in the digitization of businesses, governments. I mean, the amount of money that's invested in making things more available to you online. You've got the decentralization occurring, so more things becoming decentralized, as it were, rather than these massively centralized entities that we've seen in the past. So more information reaching us in a much more decentralized way. Acceleration of healthcare access. I mean, healthcare, it got stressed during the pandemic, but also you've got the ability to have that sort of just remote diagnostic with your first line healthcare practitioner. Now, if I was ill, I'd still like to see a doctor, but at least it gives them an ability to scale and scale quickly. And then we think about the rise of contactless. I mean, my dad still struggles with this because he's like, I still like to pay things with cash, but everywhere I go, I've got to use my contactless card. But if I look at my daughters, they've only grown up knowing contactless. They don't carry cash. So we're moving to a kind of cashless society as well. So all those things have been enabled by the back end of communications.
And that cashless thing has massively accelerated from the pandemic as well. The amount of businesses that stopped taking cash for contamination reasons, etc. Like that's massively changed. Like you see it everywhere, even in kind of farmers markets and stuff. Now you can't pay with cash, which is bizarre considering where we were 3-4 years ago.
So very very much that sort of digitization of any transaction we do is now happening. It's not even about happening; it's happened, and it's just going to continue to reach the rest of the world. I think the kind of fifth point on that is the undigitized businesses, because there's still a ton of them out there that are running themselves on spreadsheets. Still, I mean, some of the biggest supply chains in the world, and you have to think about that for a second, because it's like I was looking at some of the numbers around this. It's like 11 trillion goes through the supply chains, meaning everything from me ordering a pair of trainers to the flour getting delivered to the local bakers. There's all a supply chain that sits behind that, and it's undigitized or run on basic spreadsheets, and from the biggest companies in the world down to the smallest suppliers. And that is one of the big changes ahead, is how does that all get changed? How does that start to take advantage of all this sort of decentralization going out there? You see the rise of that happening with blockchains and smart contracts starting to be very important for companies to utilize to be able to digitize their supply chains, digitize the settlement of transactions between themselves. Phenomenal amount of effort going into that.
Yeah, I think just piggybacking on that, what for that to enable that change and that complete change of working and enhanced, I guess, digital embedding within business, what key digital skills do you see are needed, I guess, going forward for people professionally and personally, I guess? Where do you see that going?
Well, I mean, I think there's probably a couple of ways to address that. So if we're thinking about it from business skills, then it's going to be that awareness about how to work and develop business on a more digital footing, and making sure that you're getting that development as you come through your stages. So from the kind of early in careers, how do I improve my digital awareness and skill sets, to those that are maybe the founders or running their own firms, is how do they digitize what they've got within the companies. This is going to be really important. Understanding how the evolution may occur as it relates to your kind of quote to cash processes at work. So you think about all businesses kind of run on that sort of central theme of quotes out the door to quote for what I'm selling, to receiving cash in the door for what I've actually sold, my finished goods. Just being aware of what you can do to optimize that supply chain, optimize that way in which you deliver your kind of product in market, and make sure it's attractive to either your consumers or your buyers, depending on your B2C or B2B type of business, and making sure you're frictionless. Right? Thinking about that contactless concept of you're not carrying cash anymore, you're not doing heavier weight transaction settlements at the back end. You want to optimize that more for frictionless payment and payment settlement to enable your business. That's the type of thing I would think about from a business sense. If you want to know from a technical sense, for any of our technical audience out there, the skills that are required are becoming pretty common. Backends like Python, API knowledge, ability to do DevOps within that. The front end React, making sure that you've got ability to do the kind of Java applet-based capabilities and make them mobile. And data engineering is hugely important because we're getting so much data now. We have so many data points about ourselves. If we just think back about over our shoulder, I'm just looking at some of my stats that I've got here. There was 4 million Google searches 10 years ago. How many is there now? 44 million in 1 minute.
Blimey.
So, it's an incredible amount of data change and data knowledge that's going on around there. Amazon 10 years ago was doing $83,000 a minute. They're now doing $283,000 a minute.
Wow.
It's staggering, right?
Yeah, really staggering. Really, really staggering. I think also the thing that I often think about is with the improvements in technology, including the internet and that connectivity, there's always, I think, as a founder, as a business, as an entrepreneur, as a person, there's always a comparison out there, easy to find. There's always someone doing it maybe faster, using the internet better, being more connected. How do you slow that down as a business, and how do you prioritize the elements you can control, I guess, from a connectivity perspective?
I think that's just being aware of what you can kind of look at from techniques to enhance or optimize that experience. So optimize it through process automation. Look at robotic process automation especially, because there's still a ton of stuff gets done very manual or very human orientated touch wise. But also make it more human in the experience of anything that interacts person to person, just as we are chatting just now. It should be connected. It should feel real rather than cold. And I think that's kind of the next frontier around this. Is there's a lot of talk about AI and machine learning helping enable access to information, but the next frontier of that is how do you make it more a human experience, so that it's not just, "Hi, I'm Steve, I'm your chatbot today," and it's really quite a cold script. You can tell it's a script kind of base.
Yeah.
Can you answer questions 1 through 3? And if you can't, then I'll escalate it to a human interaction. But there is actually some very clever developments in that space that are thinking more about that human-based interaction and making them completely seamless from an AI interaction stance. One of the firms I was dealing with, just on my own personal basis, they've got a pretty sophisticated bot that was helping me with a transaction that I was doing. I couldn't tell that wasn't human behind that. And it was quite a sophisticated query.
Whereas you can sometimes you can definitely tell. I remember having a transaction with a utilities provider a few weeks ago, and it was very clearly a bot and very tricky to get away from the bot because it wasn't very useful. Whereas I was going to ask kind of how you see AI taking more of a steer, especially where you're talking about that human user experience and that human interaction. So you've I guess basically answered that for me. Yes, it's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's also, if you expand that a little bit, Ellie, is we put a ton of effort in as companies over the years on customer success and really trying to do the human element of that customer success. I think the smart firms out there now are looking at those playbooks and seeing how can I apply that to exactly your point, so that you can't tell that you've got some other interaction going on, or that they've got a way in which they can take the sense of the way the conversation's going and move it to the human touch immediately upon sensing that there's a need for it, the interventional need, as it were. That'll help companies scale, it'll help address more sophisticated type of issues. And there are firms out there looking at how they solve for that. It's not trivial, but it's one of those kind of development spaces ahead that will broker the next level conversations when they're required.
Yeah. What do you think the next, I guess, big thing in the internet sounds very grand, doesn't it? What is your senses of what the next big, I guess, frontier to cross is when it comes to the internet? Is it that machine learning side of things?
I think definitely the machine learning is going to continue to develop. It is still very much going to be hugely rule-based in the kind of next 4 or 5 years, as it were. AI will continue to evolve and develop on top of that. It will need in itself sort of moves forward in quantum computing type capabilities to fully address it, just because the computational power for real true AI is still on the fringes, as it were. I mean, there's a ton of things get labelled as AI, which in reality are just very clever experiential developments or ways of masking the machine aspects that sit behind conversational interception or conversational support, as it were. So I think AI is definitely, it's there, but it's a 5 to 10 year journey as opposed to it's this massive explosion now. But it's something that's worth striving for, and that whole ML element. In between that, there's data. There's this massive amount of information that we've gathered, and massive amount of knowledge that we've got about us as individuals or companies in terms of the way in which the businesses need to be transacted. I think that's going to be the next frontier. How does that really evolve itself? And, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world have made an enormous amount of money on advertising or targeted elements based upon knowing us. That's not really been applied to business yet.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think that when I look out there at the moment at the job market, for example, there's everywhere I look, it's a data science job. It seems like it's definitely a massive, huge growth area for businesses of all sizes and shapes, and it's something that is relatively untapped.
That's right. I mean, data engineering, data ops, data lakes, data pipelines, it is all extremely relevant right now in understanding how to tap into that and then be able to do something useful with it. I think that's kind of really going to emerge as part of that new frontier. There's just too few kind of data scientist type elements, and especially STEM. If we go back to how we're teaching ourselves through school, through university, data management, data engineering is still pretty much an untapped volume, as it were. Yes, there's interesting university degrees in it, but is it part of the national frameworks for learning? That's something that we can look at. Is that part of the business frameworks for learning? I think when it's the focus of a business, it becomes part of the curriculum. But ultimately, is every business really looking at data science in the way of, this is my future business model? Not yet, and I think they need to be. I think they need to be thinking, on that horizon 2, 3, which is that next sort of 10 to 15 years, and say, well, what am I going to do to get ready for that, and how am I going to equip my workforce for that? What's my apprenticeship programs? If I'm doing apprenticeship programs, developing that talent in terms of data knowledge and data management skill sets.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I think what else do you think that that businesses can do, businesses of all sizes or startups, founders, one-man bands, what can they do to set themselves up best for the way that the world is going from an internet perspective over the next 10, 20 years? How can you best set yourself up?
Yeah, I think it's really about getting a good handle on where product 2, 3, and 4 is going, because you'll know what you're doing now, right? Everyone knows what you're doing now with product 1, but it's that next sort of step. What am I doing with products 2 and 3, and how is that taking advantage of product 1? Ultimately, I look at it in a kind of societal sense, in that you've got these different personas, from whether it's customers, whether it is your front end product teams either selling or delivering capabilities in the market, or whether it's your support functions, whether that's HR, whether that's finance, whether that's business operations, and really making sure that you've got this kind of notion of customer journey, staff journey to support the customer journey, and then how your supporting functions are making sure every step of the way we're either optimizing or getting ready for that next generational shift in products. And that means that the product side of the house needs to be much more in tune with what the business capabilities are, instead of it just being, we've got a new product, let's take it to market, and then it's a hair race to get it out there, and pivot then to try and get the operational scaling done, and then pivot then to get the people scaling done. That needs to be more cohesive from my view, and treated more like a kind of life cycle, from planning, building to running the business, as one thought through life cycle, not just in a series of stages.
Yeah. What this is just curiosity, but because you've literally watched the internet grow and develop, and you've been pretty close to how it has changed, what do you think has surprised you the most about where we are now versus where we were 40 years ago?
Yeah, we continue to let security be one of the biggest barriers around the internet, and it really shouldn't be, because there is ways in which that could be managed much more effectively. But we've now got this almost like Wild West. I mean, it's almost like going back to the old days of watching. Even the language of it, the black hats and the white hats is based on the kind of westerns of old. You always knew the bad guy was because he wore a black hat, and the good guys were the sheriffs with the white hats, the cowboys with the white hats. But I think security is a real issue. I think systems need to be much more secured. I think privacy, data privacy, is going to become a really big issue. And you kind of get that now, but what you don't really get is that sort of real mass scale. We need to be a bit more private around either personalized data or the way that is held and secured. And it tied back to that whole notion of how we secure things. And given the size of kind of like the attack surface, just the sheer interventional things that have to be done to secure, from mobile phones to iPads to tablets to laptops to systems, even some of the biggest cloud providers are not adverse to having breaches or having issues that you hear about in the news, right?
Yeah, you do. You hear businesses of all sizes, ginormous businesses, getting struck down by pretty nasty kind of breaches. Every week there seems to be another, really.
But if you think about it in a digital world, right? I mean, there's now something like 15 million denial of service type events go on a year, right? So that's trebled just in the last 5 years alone. That's a pretty scary number. And that's everything from script kiddies sitting there just having a little fun because they found something on the dark web, or they were given a script by someone just to hack around with, to those that are nation state based. And I think that's really where you're going to see the industry really start to consolidate and start to really do more to help secure commercial environments, to help secure the private environments, as it were. But still more needs to be done in that space. So I think that if people are out there thinking about security, then please keep doing that, because we need you guys. We need the heroes out there kind of building a stronger, better place for us, and not just letting it be open free for all that we've got right now.
Yeah. I think I asked what you had surprised you the most, and your answer about security and data is, I guess, a slightly negative way that the internet went in terms of those pieces that still need to be worked on. What is there anything that has come out of the internet that has shocked you that is immensely positive, something that you just weren't expecting, other than, I guess, communication, which I think is probably the most wonderful thing that the internet has done?
Gamification. Gaming. I mean, I'm a bit of a game geek myself, so I absolutely love the ability to just play games. Whether it's FIFA or whether it's
Wordle.
Wordle. It's just
my
amazing
favorite,
because that actually plays the human psyche. I mean, ever since we learned to walk the earth, as it were, you've always been interested in having a little competition about something.
Yeah.
And I think that whole gamification is just a massive boost. Not just the endorphins it generates as you kind of get excited by playing something and either scoring a goal or winning at Wordle. My wife's absolutely hooked on the thing. And you've seen that time and time again. Angry Birds, right? I mean, that was the complete sensation of its time. And then there's been just any number of ways in which people get a release, as it were. And then the biggest surprise would be gamifications become massive. It's going to be even more massive, and we'll see more of that in our day-to-day lives.
I like the fact that it's still so varied. Like, some games have come on a really long way. I remember playing my first kind of computer game, which was a haunted house game. I can't even remember what it was called. Loved it. And some games look completely different because they have come on leaps and bounds. But actually, some of the golden oldies are still going strong, and some are just as simple as Wordle, which is a very, very simple idea that is taking the world by storm. It's kind of amazing, I think, that variety that has come out of internet advancement.
Yeah, my first game was on the BBC B, which I'm sure is way too old for most of this audience, but that was an early 80s computer and a 32K memory, and the game was called Elite, and I was completely hooked on it. So, and the goal was to become good. It was the whole something you had to become an elite fighter pilot in this spaceship. which just appeals to any sort of teenage boy's imagination at the time. So,
so good, so good. And just last question from me is what is your key takeaway, key piece of advice that you would offer founders and entrepreneurs about how they can maximize the opportunities of the internet? What would be your one thing that you would like people to think about?
Focus on the human experience. Look to crack that, because anything that makes things interactive and easy for people to consume, make it contactless as much as you may want to from a kind of digital transactions that stands, but don't forget the human element, because that is the bit that keeps people coming back to you. It's what keeps you sticky with a product or with using something, because you've got a good experience with it. So my number one is always customer success, customer success, customer success. Everything else, if your customer's happy, if they're choosing, using, and loving your product, they'll keep coming back. So you've got to nail that bit. And then under the surface, you can be paddling like a mad swan across the water. It's like race-like performance and paddle hard underneath. But just make sure what's seen to the customer and the way they experience it really is nailed, because that will make a difference to your longevity as a company and the ability then to develop products 2, 3, 4, 5, because you've then got that DNA cracked. And that to me is the most important bit.
Definitely. Oh, that was absolutely flown by, Steve. I can't believe it's been half an hour already. But thank you so much for your time. I've honestly really enjoyed our chat. I'm going to be looking up Elite, BBCB Elite. Was that what it's called? I'm going to look that up after this.
I think they were the guys that wrote it. So yeah, BBCB Elite.
I'm sure it's still hovering around somewhere on the internet.
Yeah, there's a whole new. I've not got into it because it would just suck my life out from doing productive things. So
yeah, I'll look at it after work today. I won't start now today. Right, but thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we will speak to you again soon for another event coming your way. We're not responsible for, nor do we endorse in any way, third-party websites or their content. The views and opinions expressed in this content don't necessarily reflect the views of Barclays Bank UK plc, nor should they be taken as statements of policy or intent of Barclays Bank UK plc. Barclays Bank UK plc takes no responsibility for the veracity of information intimated by a third party, and no warranties or undertakings of any kind, whether express or implied, regarding the accuracy or completeness of the information given. Barclays Bank UK plc takes no liability for the impact of any decisions made based on information contained and views expressed. Barclays Bank UK plc, authorised by the Prudential Regulation Authority and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulation Authority.